Hey everybody, welcome back to Integrative Psychonautics. I hope you're doing well out there. So in today's video, we're going to be tackling a bit of what might be a controversial topic, especially if you're someone who is an atheist or someone who is a rationalist or someone who is generally kind of anti-spirituality, anti-woo. I'm going to make the case here in this video for why you want to be studying spirituality if you're using psychedelics, why you want to be exploring spirituality, especially if you're doing kind of moderate to high dose psychedelics, why these are important to put together and how that all kind of works. So if this interests you, watch on. Okay, so as I said in the introduction here, I'm going to make the case here with you guys for why you probably want to include some form of study of spirituality as part of your psychedelic practice, as part of your well-rounded toolkit for using psychedelics effectively and safely. Let me give a little context as to kind of where I'm coming from in this video, and then I'll lay out my reasoning here. And you can, of course, evaluate for yourself if you agree or not, if you resonate with this message, if it makes sense or not to you. So in terms of context, a lot of what is driving me to make this video is that I spend a fair amount of time on Reddit, in conversation in various psychedelic subreddits, largely to contribute, to be learning more about people's experiences, to see generally how people in society are using psychedelics, since there's kind of this mass influx of users, kind of all ages, quite frankly, into the psychedelic space, a lot of whom are there because of belief in the healing power of psychedelics, understanding of the healing power of psychedelics, curiosity about psychedelics, and now that they're kind of being understood to be perhaps safer, it's given a lot of people a sense of green light. There's a lot of people obviously who are involved because of mental health reasons, wanting to feel happier, feel better, more aligned, this kind of a thing. And you read these miracle stories about healing with psychedelics, and it's all very compelling, and so everyone ends up rushing in. So we have all these new people who quite frankly are undereducated and underprepared for the experience that they're probably about to experience. And this translates into a lot of people taking way bigger doses than they should be taking. And quite frankly, getting, there are a lot of ways we could put it, but the colloquial term these days online is getting wrecked, right? So there are a lot of people who are taking giant doses of psychedelics and absolutely having terrible, overwhelming, terrifying, confusing experiences. And then a lot of that, depending on the dose, turns into kind of jumbled, fragmented experiences and jumbled, fragmented thinking and conclusions, and these kind of weird, kind of strange, philosophies about life or cosmology, or, the nature of reality, or the nature of the self, or the nature of whatever this mysterious fucking experience we're all in called life is. You get like a set of messages that are really confused and confusing from an external perspective to read and encounter. And more to the point, I see a lot of people who are just having terrible experiences because they have no sense of the kind of state and experience that they're about to encounter. So they have no conceptual framework, they have no concept, no understanding of what the heck they're about to engage in. And then they throw 5 grams of mushrooms at that, or 400 mics of LSD at that, and then it's overwhelming, it's terrifying, it's confusing, it's stressful, it's uncomfortable, it's wires get crossed, and it's just a mess. And I see a lot of this. I see way more of this than I think there really should be. I mean, there is a rite of passage element to it, and for sure, since I was young and using psychedelics, I've seen people go through this, over and over and over throughout the years. But we're seeing it at a scale now that is just way wider, way broader, because there's just more people using psychedelics. And we can mitigate this experience of having terrible experiences, overwhelming experiences, jumbled, disjointed, confusing experiences. And what I'd like to propose here is that having some sort of a sense of study of psychedelics is part of what remedies that in my experience. So let me explain my thinking about that a little bit more, now that I've kind of set up an understanding of why I'm bringing this to your attention. So let's talk about it. So one of the major things that psychedelics do when they really kick in and we're really having this experience of being on a psychedelic is that they can tend to decondition and break apart our set of assumptions of what we have always kind of assumed or perhaps been culturally conditioned into believing is experientially true about life. So there are a lot of ideas that each of us kind of passively takes in, as a lot of assumptions about reality, about the nature of self, about the nature of, the spiritual realm, if you want to go there with it, about the nature of relationships, about the nature of life itself. There are a lot of assumptions that we kind of passively take in as part of our cultural conditioning and our upbringing process that are just kind of baked into the experience for us, that we generally don't really question or evaluate or challenge. We just kind of operate as though they are true, without really ever taking time to, reflect on them or really sift through them. And then along comes psychedelics, right? And all of a sudden we take a psychedelic and we're being confronted with questions, about all of these things that have been conditioned into us that, that we've never thought about before. And all of a sudden our model, our map, our, construction of understanding of what reality is, what we are, et cetera, gets loosened up. And in that loosening, there's a great opportunity there. But there's also a lot of confusion, ambiguity, and questions that come with that loosening up of our model of reality. Quick little side note. One of the tools that is effective in hypnotherapy, one of the things we're doing in hypnosis, hypnotherapy, neurolinguistic programming, approaches to working with the mind and the nervous system like that, is that we are essentially helping the person to loosen up their model of reality, especially painful or dysfunctional parts of their model of reality that aren't working for them, and help them start to unplug from that a little bit to create room for movement, for change, for shifts. So this can be a therapeutic thing, properly applied. But when you've got some person who's never really given a deep thought to life or the nature of self or nature of reality, and all of a sudden you throw 5 grams of mushrooms into the mix, that person is not cognitively, mentally, or emotionally really cultivated to be able to use that in a therapeutic way. They have no idea how the hell to work with a loosening of their own model of reality enough to effectively create some sort of useful, helpful change for themselves. I kind of got off on a tangent here, but I think that's all good, building of my point here. What I'm trying to say here is that one of the things that psychedelics fundamentally do is unground us. And they create a much more relativistic, fluid experience of reality. And this is part of why a lot of what feels right and good and rewarding and enjoyable in psychedelics are things that give us a focal point, right? This is why music is so beautiful and part of why music is so rewarding and beautiful in psychedelics is because they give us something to ground our attention into. Right? This is also why, say, meditation can be really rewarding and beautiful on psychedelics, or why, something like a ceremony where you're sitting with other people and you're doing a thing and there's a way to engage, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And what you tend to find is the less structured, less grounded, the less of a clear focal point we have on psychedelics, the more our mind can tend to float in all kinds of different directions, and we can end up having these very messy, sloppy, disorganized, uncomfortable, confusing experiences, right? And especially the higher the dose, the more that trends towards being the case, right? And so having some sort of a focal point on psychedelics is often largely very useful, but also there's got to be flexibility and fluidity with that. There's got to be changeability in that, because if something's too rigid, that tends also not to work well with a psychedelic headspace. Okay, so I've been yammering on, but I'm trying to build my point here that psychedelics do a thing to us, right? And this thing that they do to us tends to be a loosening, abstracting, ungrounding, unfocusing kind of thing, right? And there's a lot of benefits to that, and there's a lot that's beautiful about that, and there's huge opportunity in that. But again, you take someone who's, maybe a teenager who's never really given a deep thought to anything about life, or someone who's you've been deeply, in one worldview their entire life, and then you throw a bunch of psychedelics at that. What tends to happen is that this person's model of the type of experience they're having, the type of body sensations they're having, the type of thoughts, the types of perceptions, the types of somatic sensations moving through their body, the types of feelings and emotions that might be totally new and it's hard to find the words for, that start to arise in the experience, can be very disorienting, overwhelming, confusing, threatening, challenging, strange, alarming, et cetera, right? And so if we start to trend in that direction of struggling with our own experience because we have no framework for it, then we tend to have these difficult, rough, overwhelming, tough experiences, right? Or these disorganized type experiences. Okay, enter study of spirituality here. Now, what I want to propose to you is that you don't have to believe that it's true. You don't have to agree with the ideas that you're studying. To read books on spirituality, you don't have to buy in that there is a spiritual reality and that you think it's true and that this is an accurate take on the cosmos or on the nature of self or anything like that, right? But I think having those inputs gives you all of a sudden frameworks that are kind of implicitly, unconsciously there in the background, that once you get into this altered state where your normal functioning and your normal cascade of assumptions and thinking and way of functioning doesn't compute, you've got this alternate model to consider. And that alternate model might help you to organize and understand the experience you're having in a way that's perhaps useful or meaningful or protective, or valid or comforting or helpful in some way. I would also, by the way, I don't want to just say spirituality here. I would also include in that studies on philosophy, studies on ontology, studies in psychology. I think any sort of map or model or framework that gives some accounting for these transcendent, altered states of experience and the sets of kind of types of emotions and insights that tend to arise becomes really a valid, useful tool. And to not have any of those inputs, to have no idea and no sense of that, and have not fed any of these ideas into your brain or into your system, really does leave you at risk for a lot more overwhelm and a lot more difficulty adapting to that space. So that's why I'm saying this is useful. The reason I choose spirituality as the focal point of this video, and why I'm proposing that as being perhaps the best way to go with this, is that in spirituality, there's obviously a lot of mystical experience history at the root and the foundation of spiritual study and spiritual practice. Spiritual practices are essentially the art and the practice of engaging and stimulating, creating, and experiencing mystical experiences, and then really unpacking, the meaning of that. What does that mean? What are the implications of this? What does this kind of direct and point at? And as we, have tested this over time, what seems to be repeatedly true? So, there's a lot of accounting for the weird physical experiences we have, the weird somatic experiences we have, the types of emotions, the types of realizations we tend to arrive at that you find in spiritual literature, and also techniques for how to work with different kind of mind states and emotional states, or maps of understanding different levels and layers to our experience that help us to sort it. And so that's my point here. This is the case. So knowing that that's the case, that psychedelics tend to unground us and loosen up our map and model of the world and leave us unsure of a lot of things, and then you throw a lot of wattage of that uncertainty into things and you're not functioning the way you were, what do you think? Do you think that having some sort of a map or model of understanding, whether it's like a Jungian, map of psychology, which might also just be theoretical and not really all that accurate or true, even though a lot of people seem to experientially think it is, or something more like, some of the core Buddhist practices and beliefs, or some of the Hindu Buddhist, the Hindu practices or beliefs, or what have you, shamanic traditions. If you try those on, I'm a big fan of intellectual honesty and trying these worldviews on, these maps on, and discerning what do I think is bullshit here, what do I think might have some truth to it. What do I find might be useful as a metaphor of thinking, at the very least, as kind of a tool to organize my understanding, whether or not I think it's literally factually true or not, and what do I think is just absolute nonsense here. I think it's totally valid to try these things on without, all of a sudden making yourself a believer, right? Or making yourself, now I'm an irrational spiritual person, but simply trying them on as perspectives on what is a direct embodied experience ultimately, to see if they help you make a different sense of it that's helpful in some way. So that's kind of the idea here. I really, over the years, full transparency, if you're new to me, new to my history, my background, maybe at some point I'll make a video about that if there's interest. I come from, I've been using psychedelics for 30 years at this point. I started in the early 90s. I went through a whole, long phase of spiritual study, spiritual practice that was quite serious and quite traditional in a lot of ways. I've been around a lot of other people. I've been in a lot of community of spiritual practitioners and a lot of psychonauts and psychedelic practitioners. I know hundreds and hundreds of people that have done a lot of psychedelics, including psychedelic therapists and, kind of new age types, yoga types, Burning Man types, ravers, hippies from the Grateful Dead scene, yada, yada. I've kind of been plugged into that whole world in California for most of my adult life. So I have a lot of reference experiences to pull from, both in terms of people I know and observations I can make, and my own, right? So I have perhaps a wider set of sample material to draw, insights from than perhaps some people who are newer to psychedelics or only using them for therapeutic purpose or have only been using them for 3 years, et cetera, right? What I've seen is that, generally speaking, the people who have a spiritual orientation, map, or model of life, whether or not they totally buy into it or not, whether they're traditional or rigid about it or not, the people I know who have a meditation practice, a set of spiritual practices, a way of working with life force energy in their body, these people tend to have a much better time with psychedelics. They tend to have better experiences more often. They tend to get disentangled from difficult experiences more often. They tend to generally reap the rewards of the psychedelic experience more, from what I've seen. The people I see who tend to go sideways and have really difficult ones more frequently, or tend to be overwhelmed, or tend to get messy and sloppy and make a big big mess of things in their lives from a really weird experience on psychedelics. Generally speaking, those people tend to not have a map or a model to draw from, to organize, and to work with. These are generally people who, when things go internal and go uncertain and go confusing, are not comfortable and adaptive to that. So I do think there's benefit in spiritual practice here, even if you're not fully, rationally bought in to the idea. Just to make it explicit here, part of my channel as Integrative Psychonautics is really to be integrative about the spiritual and the rational, the scientific and the intuitive and the perhaps, hard to measure or prove aspects of all of this experience, to be honest and forthright about all of it, and to really bring it together into a cohesive kind of articulation for you guys. So here we are talking about the spirit side of things. So what do you think? Do you agree? Does this make sense? Is this offensive? Is this challenging for you? Can you kind of understand where I'm coming from with this? Or are you absolutely cool, great, good for you, but, fairly dismissive of this concept. I'd love to know, leave comments down below. And as usual, do the, thumbs up, like, subscribe, let the algorithm know I'm here, share videos with folks, all that good stuff. I do want to grow the channel, create more visibility, and continue to offer this positive message to more people. So thanks for watching. I'd be curious to know how this video and this idea lands for you. And I do wish you the best, and I will have new videos for you very shortly. I'm working on a bunch literally today right now. So, all right, I'll talk to you guys soon. Take care. Hope you're doing well out there. And as always, thank you. All right, much love.